Are you looking for a quilt that appears challenging but is really quite simple to make? Why not try this blooming 9-patch? It's made from beginner blocks, a combination of squares and 9-patch blocks that are set on point. It couldn't be more easy. Are you ready to begin? A copy of the supply list is below, along with links to these other handouts. The finished size of this quilt top is 42.5 by 56.5 inches, but you can easily adapt this pattern to make a smaller or larger project. Part of the appeal of the blooming 9-patch pattern is how the rows magically blend together. This is achieved through your fabric selection by making sure adjacent squares share colors, patterns, and relative value. The more the colors, patterns, and relative values are alike, the more fabric blending. For example, check out these 3 fabrics. They share the same pattern and similar colors. They are all in the medium dark value range. See how they blend into the next square when 9-patch blocks are added? Now look at these 3 fabrics. They all share this purplish color, but the center fabric has a different pattern. When I add the 9-patch blocks, the 9 individual squares in each of these blocks stand out. Because the first 2 fabrics are closer in value, the 9-patch doesn't jump out as much as it does in the 4th block over, where the values are a little more further apart. Here's a 4th fabric. It's much lighter in value, but shares the same pattern and some of the same colors. That change in value really makes the 9 patches stand out. The same is true with this fabric. It shares a color with the adjacent fabric, but the value and the pattern are different. The 9 patch stands out, which is okay. There's no right or wrong fabric choice. Just note that if you like the blended look, then you want to choose fabrics that share patterns, colors, and value. If the thought of choosing fabrics based on their color, pattern, and value seems overwhelming, why not try concentrating on just one attribute? I chose these 4 fabrics because each one shares a color with the adjacent fabric. Here's this blue-green, and then here's the pink, and here's the pink again. Sometimes I like to start with lighter fabrics in the center and then move to darker fabrics to get a glowing effect. Other times I just use random fabrics. That's why I like this pattern so much. No matter which fabrics you choose, the finished product always looks good. If you'd like more ideas for fabric choices, Google images for blooming 9-patch quilts. Make sure all your fabric's been pressed before cutting. Refer to these 2 handouts for the sizes of your strips and squares. It's important to keep track of your fabric when cutting, so I like to keep numbered reminders nearby. When cutting a large number of 5-inch squares, in this case I need 12, you'll want to first cut out 5-inch strips. Fold each strip in half and then line them up. Trim the ends, move over 5 inches, and cut. Here's 12 5-inch squares. Since this quilt is set on point, you'll need these setting triangles along the edges. For the corner triangles, you'll cut 2 4¼ inch squares, and then you'll cut them on the diagonal. Unlike these corner triangles where the straight of grain lies on these 2 shorter sides, these side triangles must have the straight of grain on these longer sides. So you'll cut 6 squares, 7 5/8 inches, and then you'll cut on both of those diagonals. Use this handout as a guide. Start with fabric number 1 and number 2. Sew 2 strips of fabric number 1 to 1 strip of fabric number 2. Press to the dark. Then sew 2 strips of fabric number 2 to 1 strip of fabric number 1. Press towards the dark. At this point, your strip set should measure 5 inches across. Remember, your accuracy depends on your cutting, sewing, and pressing. Before you go on, make any adjustments that are necessary to get this to a 5-inch width. Trim the ends and then cut every 2 inches. You'll need 16 of these 2-inch sections and 8 of these 2-inch sections. Use this handout as a guide for laying out your 9-patch block. You'll put right sides together. Make sure to match these seams. Stitch a scant 1/4 inch. Your completed square should measure 5 inches. Continue making 9-patch blocks using this handout as a reference. Please note that in this block, fabric number 1 is considered dominant because there are 5 squares made from that fabric. You'll need 8 of these blocks. In the next group of 9 patches, fabric number 2 is the dominant block. You'll need 16 of these squares. A word of caution when making these 9 patches. After sewing 2 sections together, it's very easy to pick up a section like this and sew it together because it makes a 9-patch block. But please note that you want the dominant part of the block to be this number 2 fabric, and so you would need to sew this section on. Just keep that in mind when making these 9-patch blocks. When working on this 9-patch, you'll end up with 1 strip of each one of these fabrics, but you'll need 2 strips in order to make this set. Don't worry, all you need to do is cut that strip in half and then sew them side by side. Continue making strip sets using fabric 3 and 4. From these sets, you'll need 24 9-patch blocks. Lay out your blocks on the design wall, large table, or on the floor. Place the 3 number 1 fabric squares down the center. Add the 9-patch blocks with fabric 1 and 2. Fabric number 2 squares go next. Then the 9-patch blocks followed by fabric number 3 squares and the last set of 9-patch squares. Add the setting triangles and you're ready to sew. You'll be sewing in diagonal rows. This can get very confusing if you don't set up a system to keep everything in order. Some folks like to pin notes to their blocks or use numbered pins to help keep organized. I usually just work with 1 row at a time. I put right sides together and then hold the side to be sewn in my right hand. If I lay the blocks down, I always make sure that the side to be sewn is on the right. I can add more blocks to this stack, right sides together, side to be sewn on the right. When I take this to my machine, the side to be sewn ends up on my right. I chain piece these sections together, and then I press to the 5-inch square. By chain piecing, I keep everything in order so the blocks can easily be placed back in the row. Continue putting right sides together till the row is completely sewn. I find it less confusing if I add the triangles after the squares and 9 patches have been sewn in the row, but it's not necessary. You could add these when you first start sewing. Put right sides together. Make sure to line up the 90-degree corners. You'll have a little tail at the end that you can clip off after pressing. Press towards the triangles. And on to the next row. Put right sides together and stitch. To add these corner triangles, fold in half and crease the midpoint. Fold this section in half and crease that midpoint. And then put right sides together, matching the crease marks, pin, and sew. After stitching, press towards the triangle and clip off all these little tails. At this point, all the rows should be pressed. Start in the corner and put right sides together. Make sure to match these seams, pin, and then stitch. Place the section back on the wall and then put right sides together. Notice when sewing diagonal rows, ends are never going to match up. For this quilt, you'll look to match these intersections. Pin and stitch. Continue in this manner until all the rows have been completed. Hope you get a chance to work on one of these quilts. I'm always amazed by the end results. Send us a photo of your completed quilt so we can post it at our site. As I said earlier, you can easily make a larger or smaller version of this quilt. You might also like to use this technique for borders. Thanks for visiting learnhowtoquilt.com. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel and share our videos with your friends. Thanks.